Good morning. If we can go ahead and call our meeting to order. I'm so excited to see so many people here. I'm glad that the passion of our Equity and Community Partnership Committee is catching on, and I'm so grateful that folks are willing to come to an early morning meeting to help us think about this topic that's so important to our newly elected for a fourth-term governor, and to our Oregon Educational Investment Board, and of course to the folks who matter the most, which are the kids and families we're all hoping to serve better. So one important logistical piece is that we are actually ending the meeting at 10 o'clock. There's been some confusion about start time and end time, and we want to have our meetings be from 8:30 to 10 going forward, and we're going to practice that today. So just keep that in context of the agenda. And we're actually going to start this morning by going around and doing introductions, and we, of course, to our friends that are sitting back here, you are actually very welcome to join us and sit at the table. We typically, with these state boards and committees, it's very formal, but we like to keep the Equity and Community Partnership meeting a little bit more inclusive. So if you have any desire to join us at the table, you don't have to if you don't want to. So no pressure. But let's go ahead and start with introductions. I believe most of you know me, but my name is Nicole Maher, and professionally I serve as the president and CEO of Northwest Health Foundation, and I also have the pleasure of being on the Oregon Educational Investment Board and chairing this committee. Peter, would you?
Peter Trumba, Director of Research and Policy and staff to the committee from OEIB, Oregon Education Investment Board.
I'm Nancy Golden. I'm the Chief Education Officer.
Shandine Garcia, Deputy Director of Research and Policy at the OEIB, Oregon Education Investment Board.
My name is Teresa Alonso Leon. I'm the State GED Administrator and Education Specialist for the Department of Community Colleges and Workforce Development.
I'm Jeff Lafayette, College Manager at Portland Community College.
My name is Joe Nunn. I'm a former teacher at Portland Public Schools, third generation in my family to serve as a teacher in Portland. And I also am the owner of J.J. Nunn and Associates. I run a program in conjunction with Multnomah County judges and district attorney called Fresh Start PDX out of POIC Rosemary Anderson, which was co-founded by my father.
Serena Stonemar Westlake, Policy Director of Equity and Community Engagement at OEIB.
Joyce Harris, Manager of Community Engagement, Education Northwest.
Blake Woodson, Office of Research and Data Analysis for the Oregon Department of Education.
Jose Da Silva, Principal at Springfield High School.
I'm Ramon Ramirez. I'm President of the Oregon Farm Worker Union Pecun, and I serve on the Higher Education Coordinating Council, and I represent the council on this board.
Janet Doherty Smith, I serve on the Early Learning Council.
Julia Byrne Edwards, member of OEIB and of this subcommittee, and in my other life I work at Nike and am a parent of 3 kids.
Great.
I'm Angela Bloom. I'm Executive Support to Peter Trumba and Shandine Garcia, and I'm standing in as the Board Administrator for the OEIB today.
Great.
I'm Dr. Daho, Director of Operation Easy.
I'm Jim Anderson, CTA King School and Chair of Operation Easy.
Great.
Carl Talton, Community Advocate.
Board member of Northwest Health Foundation. Great. If we could invite anyone to introduce themselves on the phone, that would be wonderful. Okay.
Oh. Hi, good morning. This is Scott Salises. I'm a State Relationship Manager with GED Testing Service, and I am the point person for GED Testing Service working with the state of Oregon and their GED program. Morning.
Good morning. Thank you. And it sounds like you are already doing great phone etiquette, which is to mute your line when you're not speaking. Thank you for that. So just to review our agenda and to kind of review for those of you who are new to our work, the Equity and Community Partnership Committee is been in operation for now a year and a half. One of our main focuses in the beginning was to really create, write, and implement an equity lens. So that was a very specific focus that we had. From there, we really began to learn as we developed as a committee that it was very important that we set specific goals and areas of focus. Prior to that, we were sort of hearing lots and lots of presentations on many really important issues around equity, and we decided at that point we wanted to set some very clear priorities to really focus our work. And so I wanted to just quickly share what those 3 priorities are, so that folks have an understanding about why we're talking about what we're talking about. So certainly there's an overarching goal to continue to see the equity lens fully implemented across systems, and to support that work really living up to its full potential. And that's an overarching goal that's very much cross-cutting. And then the 3 areas of focus for us have been specifically to increase resources and support and to improve the quality and integration of high school equivalency. We felt like even though that's an important issue that affects every Oregonian, we felt like there was such an overrepresentation of children of color in out-of-school youth and such an underrepresentation of those children in children and young adults in the services and systems that were intended to serve them. And so we felt like if we were going to reach 40-40-20, that would not be possible without specific intent and investment around that, and that it would not be possible unless there were more culturally appropriate and culturally specific ways to meet the needs of the young people so overrepresented. So that's actually was a policy that was passed at our most actually 2 OEIB board meetings ago, so congratulations to our committee. We still have some work to do to gain resources and implementation around that. The second area is really a very strong focus on the overrepresentation of children of color in special education and a focus on how they are served and supported, and a focus on where that is appropriate for children of color to be there and where it may not be appropriate for them to be there. And then the 4th area is really a very strong focus on setting a new culture in the way that we engage with families and parents and communities, and the way that we have a culture around education in the state of Oregon around true community and parent engagement. So today you're going to see a report out from Shondine really on our progress with the GED proposal or high school equivalency, kind of a follow-up on where we're at with the policy being passed and a whole host of other things. And then we're so excited to have a much deeper presentation regarding race and ethnicity and identification as it pertains to special education. And then one of the charges that we gave to the OEIB staff was to create a research work group to really think about best practices so that we would have sort of the best information to make policy recommendations. We'll then review kind of our 2014-2015 work plan. And then as a preview to our next meeting, that meeting will really focus very much on our community engagement and policy. And we're actually going to start that by having Dr. Ann Curry-Stevens come and present to us really about best practice in this field and best practice with partnering with culturally specific communities. And at that point, we will really begin to create kind of a skeleton or a draft of what that policy will look like. So that'll be the bulk of the work next week. Hopefully by the end of today we can understand much more about about the data and what's actually truly happening for children of color in special education. We'll hopefully be able to confirm or put aside any assumptions that we might have about what is actually happening, and hopefully the information will help us think forward about how we can start our policy work there. Any questions about that before we move on to the report on the high school equivalency? Great. So, and then I'll also just remind, if anyone is interested in giving public testimony, you can do that. This lovely lady here can help you sign up. And so we'd love to hear public testimony, but for the purposes of the presentation, we will only be inviting committee members to participate in that. So Shondine, would you take it away, please? Let me introduce Shondine Garcia. our
Thank
great OEIB staff members.
I have asked 3 individuals to assist me in giving you a full picture of the update of the progress of high school equivalency in Oregon. And I'm going to start with Peter Tromba.
Just really quickly, thank you very much, Shandine. I want to let folks know, especially on the committee, but also interested parties who've been following the work of the subcommittee. The full OEIB board did accept and pass our policy recommendation. At the same time, we've been in a process with the governor's office to help the governor with recommendations for his budget that he'll be putting out later this month. And I just want to report that what that entailed in terms of the high school equivalency and GED, bless you, is to actually put numbers and dollars to our proposal. And while I don't feel comfortable sharing all the intricacies of that right this second, because I still think it's being developed, what's been very, very positive is the extent to which a fairly small investment relative to our whole state budget is likely to pay off significantly in terms of the number of students who get high school equivalency. So our proposal, and Nicole and others have been very, very supportive with the board in forwarding this idea, we think is lean and mean, or lean and kind, and will deliver significant impact for our state and specifically our students who've been most affected by the opportunity gap over the years. So stay tuned, because pretty soon that will be a little bit more official, but it's making its way through the process, and I think with the guidance of Nicole and others, I'm very optimistic it's going to make it all the way through.
Ramon?
Yeah, I had a question. That's very good to hear that that you're addressing the budget side of that, because I remember at the joint meeting that we had here in this room, actually, of the subcommittee, that there was a lot of questions from a number of folks on the committee, on the joint committee, around. I mean, I think there was general consensus around support for the GED program, but there was a lot of questions around the funding aspect of it. So I think that having addressed that issue is really important for us, because the one thing that I think that's really important for us to do is to really address their concerns.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a concern of everybody that, we get the better bang for our buck here.
Yep.
And so I'm glad to hear that we're working on that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's great about what we're proposing, and so we propose kind of 3 strategies. One was to sort of better align providers and systems and leadership around high school equivalency. The other was to pay for some of the testing costs for low-income students specifically. And then the third was to really pilot some different partnerships between community organizations and community colleges to focus on culturally specific populations. It's actually just, it could potentially double the number of kids being served. I mean, literally, that's what we're proposing for basically less than $2 million. But we're in a conversation with other proposals that are $100 million, which are, really great, important priorities as well. And so I think there's support, but it's we're essentially talking about a rounding error. And so I think it will be really important for all of us and our community partners to really make it known that this is such an important priority, and to really, hear that voice over and over again, because with so many other really important initiatives with significant budgets, this doesn't always get the attention, and it's a great, very cheap solution.
One thing I did I didn't have the opportunity to do this, but Shadeen, I want to thank you for that presentation at the last meeting we had, because I think it was really important, because I felt there was a lot of tension in the room.
Yeah.
And I think when there's tension, you gotta recognize it and then you move forward. But you really need to address some of those questions that were being asked, however difficult they were. But having said that, I think I'm glad to hear that, really.
Yeah, and I think we, as an equity and partnership committee, should also just appreciate the OEIB team that did the presentation to the full OEIB board meeting. I know Julia was there, but I mean, the feedback I received from more than half of our full OEIB board reached out to me specifically to talk about their appreciation of the type of presentation that was given, the fact that young people were involved. So we had overwhelming support. All that is wonderful, but it doesn't really count if there's no money.
It's probably worth noting that the tension wasn't around this specific proposal. It was more around the process by which we're going to take a lengthy list of really worthy programs and be able to identify which ones to invest in and the sequencing. So I think it's fair to note that it wasn't a specific proposal there was tension around. It was more how are we going to create a process in which we narrow a list.
But the tension did happen during the GED presentation, so we didn't take it personally though. Good.
So back to
Well,
you,
let's
Shandy.
continue sorry, we just
That's okay.
started having a discussion.
So we hit the ground running a little bit before we had the full support, but also after we had the full support of the board, and one of which was to start some site visits. So we did a visit, we were invited by Andrew Mason at Open Meadow, and those of you that don't know Open Meadow, it's the oldest alternative school in Oregon. It's in Portland. It serves students in the 6th grade through the 9th grade who are at high risk of dropping out. We had a wonderful visit. They were wonderful hosts, and we're not limiting our visits to just schools. We want to look at sites that offer wraparound services and look at the way that they provide and serve students who we would like to be serving with high school equivalency. The second thing we're doing is gathering information from the Oregon tribes. How are they working with their high school equivalency programs? How are they partnering with community colleges and serving students in their communities? The third thing, and I invited 2 people to come and talk to you all today, have to do with the state of the GED program itself in Oregon. We had the opportunity to partner with the Department of Community College and Workforce Development on a GED summit. To that end, I invited 2 people who are integral to the success that currently you're going to learn that Oregon is experiencing with the GED. Those 2 people are Teresa Alonso Leon, who is the state GED administrator and education specialist at CCWD, and who, I just want to point out, is directly responsible for the amazing success that the GED Summit did have a week and a half ago. And before she's going to present, though, we are going to have Scott Salises, who's on the phone, who is the GED State Relationship Manager, and he's going to walk you through how our students with the inception of the new GED are faring in the state of Oregon. And I'm going to be his clicker. Scott, are you there?
I am. How am I coming through? Is the audio pretty good?
Perfect.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, good. Shanice, do you have my shorter PowerPoint up in front of you?
I do.
Okay, great. So I'll just say next as we move through.
Sounds great.
Okay, so again, good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Salis, I'm with GED Testing Service. I want to thank Shadeen for inviting me to your meeting this morning, and certainly I would love to be there in person for a future meeting if you're interested in having me at some point. So I'm going to, and also I want to say that the GED Summit meeting that I attended a week and a half ago, I thought was a terrific meeting. There were over 300 GED stakeholders involved in the meeting who attended. I thought it was a great state meeting, and a lot of the credit goes to Teresa Alonso Leon for putting that together. So in the opening plenary session of that meeting, I did a presentation showing some national data for the new 2014 GED test year to date, and then comparing that with Oregon data. And I'm going to walk you through that presentation today. So Shadeen, can you go to slide 3?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to say that the 2014 GED test debuted on January 2nd, 2014. The test is fully aligned with the career and college readiness standards that are being implemented all over the U.S. And short and simple, the goal of the new test is to have our test takers better prepared to enter post-secondary education and careers. Next slide.
Yep.
So this is the big picture national data. So here are some numbers there nationally year to date. So there are, thus far year to date, all test takers now going to take the GED test regardless of which state you're in, go to GED.com, which is a think it's extremely easy. Everyone goes to the same place to sign up, to schedule the test, preparation that they're preparing. There's material there when they're transitioning to career and college. So it's a one-stop place for everyone in the U.S., which has never happened before. And I think it's made the process much easier for test takers to figure out, you know, I'm looking to take the GED test. I don't have a high school diploma. Where do I start? A one-stop shop. So we have almost 800,000 people nationally who have created an account at GED.com, which I think is a huge number. I mean, we opened the website in late November, and we hit 100,000, it seems like within days. So it's been certainly a large amount of interest nationwide of people coming to the site and certainly creating an account. Thus far this year, we have 141,000 people across the U.S. who have taken one or more parts of the GED test. Of that 141,000, a little over 78,000 have completed all 4 parts. When I say completed, that means they've completed all 4 parts of the test. That doesn't mean they've passed all 4 parts of the test. Thus far, we have a little over 44,000 people nationwide who have passed all 4 parts of the test, and that's a national pass rate of 57%. Next slide. This next couple of slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly. I just wanted to show it. This slide that you're looking at is testing volume by month nationally. Testing volume was very low to start 2014, and the main reason for that is with the old test, we closed that out last year, and there was a large increase of test takers in 2013. Nationally, about 21% increase from the year prior, which is about 150,000 more test takers tested in 2013 than would in a quote-unquote normal year. In Oregon, the increase was about 16%. You saw about 3,000 more test takers take the GED test last year. So volume was very slow to start the year, but it's been increasing month to month. It dips a little bit during the summer. A lot of adult education programs are off, and then it comes back up in the fall. October was one of our busier months, and I think November and December will see pretty strong volume. Next slide. Next slide, I wanted to touch on. Really, what I'm trying to show here is each of the graphs there you see represent one of the 4 subject areas. And the main point I'm trying to make is you can see that it's basically like a score scale in terms of a bell curve, where most people are falling in the middle somewhere. Thankfully, you don't have many people at the real low end of the score scale, and we don't have many people yet at the higher end. So the point of this really was just to show that people who are not passing the GED test at this point in any of the 4 subject areas, they are quite close. That the vast majority of people who are not passing are scoring in the 140s, and the pass threshold for each part is a 150. So really what that means is that they're anywhere, most test takers are anywhere from 1 to 4 questions away from earning that passing standard in each subject area.
Yep.
Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to, that was the national numbers, and now we're going to move into Oregon-specific numbers for the 2014 GED test and do a comparison with national numbers. Next slide. Okay, so this is the Oregon 2014 GED test data. So year to date, there are about, for the state of Oregon, about a little over 14,000 people have created an account at GED.com. Thus far, 3,400 people have taken one or more parts of the test. A little over 1,800 have completed, and a little over 1,300 have passed all 4 parts. So that comes out to a 74% pass rate. The pass rate is simply completers divided by passers. So year to date, you are 30% higher than the national average in terms of your pass rate. So that's terrific news. You're nationwide, to put it into a little bit of context. Double check this morning, you are, I believe, the 7th highest state in the U.S. in terms of GED pass rate. Yeah, thanks. Like the round of applause. Clearly, you guys are doing something right, a lot of things right up there.
Can I ask a question about that? So I actually have a mixed feeling about that, because that high pass rate could mean one of 2 things. We're really good at doing GED preparation, or we have kids who are actually quite academically proficient that are having such a bad experience in high school, they are choosing to leave and doing a GED path. I mean, that's a double-edged sword to me. I don't know, I guess that's maybe an unfair question, but. So, I mean, I just would ask people to consider that as we go through the.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, and in my experience, when I was a high school counselor for 3.5 years at Woodburn High School, and my experience was that there was cultural values at stake here. There was, for example, a lot of kids that were thrown into positions where they had to take the leadership of their family because there was a family breakdown.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a right fit. And so a number of us, what we decided to do is identify those folks because they were actually failing in high school. They were not attending high school. They had social issues at home with their siblings. And so we were able to develop a bridge program with GED programs like CAMP and HEP.
Okay.
And put them in those programs, right? So I think it's worth examining that very question that you raised because I think you'll find that beneath the surface there's a lot of issues there that need to be surfaced. So as we move forward, there's going to have to be programs developed for these specialized programs so that the retention level of these kids and make sure that they get into GED programs, to me, is significant because what I have found is that a lot of our folks on the front lines, right? Our counselors, our tutors are not prepared culturally. They're not sensitive to these issues, these social issues, culture being one that exists in our communities of color, right? So if we're really gonna take a stab at 40-40-20, this is one of the issues that I think we need to identify. And you have probably in my book one of the experts here, Teresa Alonso, who knows this very well. And so I think moving forward, I feel really comfortable that issue will be addressed, right? So if that's happening in the Latino community, and that's certainly happening in the Latino indigenous community, right? And I just want to recognize that Teresa's she's an indigenous person from the state of Michoacan, Purépecha. We have probably, I think, the second or third largest Purépecha population in the United States. This is outside Southern California. So, I mean, I think we're moving forward in a really concrete way, but I think we need to flag that.
Okay, thank you.
So good, but thank you for raising that. That's a really, really important question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt your presentation. Keep moving along.
It's a good discussion. I think as much as you all can determine about why people do drop out of high school, it is very valuable information.
Okay.
Okay, so we're on slide number 9. It is Oregon 2014 pass rate by quarter. Okay, so this slide just shows by each quarter of this year where the pass rate has stood. So it started off at 60%, and there's probably a big jump between quarter 1 and quarter 2. And I think that's in part to, the first quarter really, this was a brand new test. Adult educators really were largely focused on getting folks through 2013. New test takers are coming in. I think new test takers initially probably thought it was the same old GED test, and many didn't realize there was more rigor to it than in the past. So that's just showing where it was a big jump there from quarter 1 to quarter 2, and probably a significantly smaller jump from quarter Q2 to Q3, and we're at 74% as of today. Next slide. Okay. This next slide is a pass rate by subject area. So the four subject areas now. The highest pass rate is in the reading through language arts, which is reading and writing. So that's an 87% pass rate in Oregon. Science is 85%, social studies 81%, and math, not surprisingly, is the lowest subject area for pass rate at 69%. Next slide, please. And this next slide just lists that same information I gave, and in parentheses there is the national pass rate. So you can compare each subject area in Oregon to the national numbers. And actually, I just noticed that for math, of the 4 subject areas, they're actually the highest amount ahead of the national average in math, which is a sign. So you're 15 points above the national average in math, which has always been the most difficult subject on the GED test, and I would say generally in school. General math is a subject area to struggle with. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, I think we have a question. Dr. Golden?
Yeah, this is Nancy Golden, the Chief Education Officer. I'm not seeing any data by race, and we're very committed to the students and the opportunity gap. So is your organization going to help us disaggregate this data so we can really take a look at all the equity issues? And
Sure, that's an excellent question. We have a data system for all 2014 GED data called GED Analytics. It has information on race, on gender, age, etc. Today's who I know is in the room has access to that system and certainly could prepare to share information on whether it's race or any other demographic information you are looking for. We have absolutely.
I'd love to see that at the next meeting.
Yeah, we would really appreciate seeing that at the next meeting. Anecdotally, we're hearing that largely those who have participated are not reflecting communities of color as they are reflected in the dropout population. So it'd be great to confirm or deny if that's actually true, and to think about as we implement our strategies how to remedy that issue.
His use policy implications, so we need to see that. That's great.
Great. Thank you. Please keep moving.
Sure. And I can share. I can share one. I did look at race a little bit earlier today, and just your largest group of color is Latino test takers, and thus far the pass rate for Latino test takers this year in Oregon is 61%. Okay. Slide 12. This is the slide of GED test with honors year to date. So with the new GED test, there's the passing standard of 150 in each subject area, and there is also now this GED with honors that can be earned. The GED with honors score is if you score 170 or above in any subject area, you are considered GED with honors. And what we're saying GED with honors means at this point in time is that you should feel very confident that you could enter credit-bearing college classes at that score level. So if you look at that, the top line is the amount of test takers nationally by subject area who are hitting that GED with honors level, and we expected it to be quite low the first year. I mean, it's a challenge. It is a challenging level to get to. And below that is Oregon. So nationally, if you average it out across the 4 subject areas, about 5% of test takers are hitting with a GED with honors. In Oregon, it's slightly below 10% are hitting that GED with honors level year to date. Next slide, please.
I just got a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe that's for Nancy. So if the honors is essentially a proxy for college readiness, how would those percentages compare with just high school graduates?
Peter, do you know? I don't. Have we done any data on that?
No, I don't.
But that's a good question
That's a really
to
good
start
question.
looking at. So we'll look into that.
And we have made the policy decision that folks who graduate with honors can apply and are fully eligible to go to any Oregon university system, is my understanding. Is that true?
We need to. Can you find that out? I want to verify that.
Okay.
You mean automatic?
It wouldn't necessarily mean automatic, but before they were not even accepting sometimes people with GEDs applications.
Do you know, Tessa?
Yeah, that data, that's not an area that we've been looking at, but it's definitely an area that we're interested in.
Okay. Great. Can you please continue?
Okay. So the next couple of slides, this is just Oregon specific data, just showing the volume year to date. And as you can see, it's similar to the national average, or national trend there, where it started very low. It peaked in May and June, dipped in the summer, and it is going back up here in the fall. So that's Oregon specific. Go to the next slide, please. The next slide is that same one I showed earlier, to show the national averages per subject area in terms of where people are falling into on the score scale. And again, the Oregon numbers are just a little bit more to the right, where more people are falling in the passing range and the next level above that. Okay, we go to the final two slides here and then brief final updates. And go to slide 16, which is the T for free at the top. Okay, so just briefly on this, we did a promotion recently. GED Ready is what we call our official practice test, which is what test takers can take to see if they are ready to pass the GED test. It's highly predictive of whether they will pass or not. So we did a promotion about a month ago actually, where for adult education centers, where we gave adult educators, they could have a promotion code where they could use this code with their students and deliver the GED Ready test at no cost as many times as they wanted. So it ran for 2 weeks nationally. We actually extended it for Oregon because the timing wasn't perfect on when we did this promotion, given that you all start classes a little later than a lot of parts of the rest of the country. So it was a 3-week program, promotion in Oregon. And if you want the next slide. So nationally, we were actually astounded by the usage. It was much higher than we expected. About 85,000 students across the U.S. Took advantage of this program and took one or more parts of the practice test to receive a detailed score report telling them the areas they need to work on. In Oregon, there was just under 2,000 students who took advantage of this promotion and took the practice test and again get that detailed score report. Next slide. This next slide is just a good visual. This shows in the green line there, it shows the usage of GED Ready in Oregon over the last couple of months. And then the enormous spike is, of course, during this 3-week promotion where it was highly utilized. And it's been pretty well utilized prior to that. So the spike really is impressive in how much interest there was and how widely it was used over that time frame.
Scott, I just want to jump in here. This promotion was open not just for students but for instructors as well, so that they could see what the tests were like and then be able to have a better understanding as to how to prepare the students based on the test. So, thanks, Scott.
Okay. And next slide, the final two slides are the slide number 19. Just wanted to share that our assessment team looked at some data here. The data was through the first half of the year, and it showed that for test takers who took this GED Ready, the practice test, and then went on to test, scoring on average across the 4 subject areas 5 points higher than test takers who were coming into test but not taking the practice test. So it's an interesting statistic that people who are taking the practice test are scoring higher. And the final slide I'll share with you is just about test takers receiving their scores. So 85% of test takers are receiving their scores within 1 hour of testing. 95% are receiving their scores within 24 hours. If you go back to the prior GED test, Oregon was good about getting test taker scores, but if you look nationwide, there were states where it took sometimes 2 to 4 weeks or longer for test takers to receive back their scores to find out if they had passed. We have test takers who are looking to go on to college immediately, apply to college. They're waiting on jobs. So we're proud of this. 95% of test takers are getting their scores within 24 hours. The vast majority of those within an hour or so. So that's what I have for you this morning. I hope it was useful information for you.
Great. Thank you.
Scott, we absolutely appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great. And I would just
thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much. Could how much is 5 to 10 minutes enough time to complete the rest of the presentation? Okay, great.
And next up is Teresa Alonso Leon.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Teresa Anunciacion, and I want to thank Shadeen for inviting me and Peter Tomba for inviting me. It's an honor to come and speak. This is my second meeting with you all. I came before and sat on the sidelines, and then today I get to share a little bit more about the GED program. As Ramon Ramirez mentioned, I am, I live in Woodburn. I'm indigenous person, Purépecha from Michoacán, Mexico. My family came to this country, like many families, to create a better life for their kids. And so when they came here, realized that we were migrant workers. And so along with my family, we picked berries, did everything we could to support ourselves. And, I'm the oldest of 5, and my family struggled a lot. We're very humble. And because of those kind of challenges, I had to make a decision about what I wanted to do with my education. I had great mentors who said, you need to go to college. But my high school experience, during my high school experience in Woodburn, became challenging, not academically per se, but I think because of all my responsibilities at home, as Ramon mentioned. I was the interpreter, I was a second mom to my brothers and sisters, I did everything. And so I kind of outgrew high school, I think is what happened. And so I was ready for bigger and better challenges. And so thankfully there was a counselor who sought me out and said, Teresa, you look really sad, what's wrong? And I didn't know I was sad. But because he really reached out, we were able to have a discussion around my future, what were my opportunities. He did some research and discovered that there was a HEP program at U of O. And I said, where do I sign up? What do I do? Where do I go? And so filled out the application, got accepted. Not with my parents' support because I was the right-hand person. They wanted me to be home. And my dad was an old school, Latino dad who said, no, my daughter's going to stay home. And so we really had to, my mom and I had to really, come together and help figure out how can we convince my dad to let me go. Eventually he did, and he ended up driving me to U of O, to the HEP program, after he accepted the fact that I needed to go do something different. And, went through the HEP program, and they had an extremely amazing support system, graduated and started college right away, which meant that I graduated or started college before my peers at school. However, I developed a passion for working with underrepresented students and low-income students, because we all have struggles, and decided that education was my field. Although for 2 seconds I wanted to be a teacher, decided that there's more special people and talents who can do that. I was not one of those, but I definitely fell in love with education. So in my career, I started working in the nonprofit sector and higher ed and so forth, and then got this amazing opportunity literally 9 months ago with the Department of Community Colleges and Workforce Development to become the new GED administrator. And I feel really blessed to have been a GED graduate and now GED administrator, and be able to talk on my experience and the challenges you guys are all talking about in respect to students and so forth. So so thank you. This is an honor. But in respect to GED at the state level, my understanding coming in was that we worked mainly with test sites. That was our primary work. And so develop relationship with our test sites around the state. And we now have over 51 test sites. But I kept getting calls from all over the state in respect to the new test series, because I came right when they transitioned. So I had very limited experience of the older test series, but was learning with everybody else on the new test series. And because of all these calls that I got, and it was calls from test administrators, instructors, actually even Shadeen called, and I realized that we needed to come together as a state and learn together, because we were all kind of experiencing that transition gap. And so I decided that in order to do that, I needed to bring a task force together. And so mind you, I was probably about 5 months into my position, so not very many people knew me. But I sent out some emails, and then those emails turned into people nominating people for an opportunity to be on the planning team. And then Shadeen joined in, and Peter joined in. And what I thought was going to be a small but mighty team turned into over 30 people were interested from different aspects of the GED community. And as I mentioned, we didn't know outside of our community colleges and outside of our test administrators, we hadn't worked with all the other outside partners. So this event gave us that opportunity to know who else was out there, who else was serving our GED students. And so we started planning in June and decided that October 24th, so 4 months later, we were going to hold the summit. And our pie in the sky was that we would maybe have 300 people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we had over 300 people register for the event. And we had people in your packets. You will see that there is a list on the back of all the people and all the partners who participated and who attended the conference. So it's everybody from instructors to test administrators to tutors. All these people came together because they saw the value and the benefit of the networking opportunity, learning from each other, and so forth. And so just wanted to share that with you. And now that we have this, now that we know who's out there, we're going to be able to work on what's next, right? What's next is the instructors were really saying, at the conference, were saying there's not enough Spanish material. So I spoke to some of the publishers. We invited 9 publishers to participate. And I spoke to some of the publishers who are now interested in working with some of our faculty, so GED instructors, Spanish instructors, who can then give them kind of, this is what's missing from the GED preparation material, this is what we want. And so they're open to listening and being able to work on it together. So, so those are some of the things I'm going to be working on next. We're also going to be working on our marketing material. I want to create an advisory council of different members of the community to be able to have discussions about what kinds of workshops, professional development is missing, what can we do?
Can we invite the folks on the phone to mute their line, please? Thank you. And we have about 2 more minutes, or we're not going to get to our other items. So I apologize. But
no worries, no worries. But just wanted to share that we are working on next steps in respect to what we learned in the conference. And in respect to demographics, I do want to mention that 18% of our Oregon testers are Latino, which is why our instructors were saying we need more Spanish material. And so we're going to work on that, which is critical.
Okay, thank you. And then I think the last question I would have is, it's great that 18% are Latino, but when we look at our population of non-completers of high school, it actually should be much larger than that. And so I hope that, one of the things that we are looking at with the policy that we passed as at OEIB is really implementing strategies that make sure that our test takers reflect our out-of-school population. So we're be excited once we get some of those questions answered. I know folks are really excited to have a discussion about this, but I'm nervous about being able to complete our other, so I'll just poll the committee.
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Hopefully short. This is for Nancy. Tell me again how the GED aligns with Common Core.
It's totally aligned.
It's totally aligned.
It's aligned.
It's totally
The new
aligned.
GED.
Yeah.
The new GED is totally aligned.
Yeah. So, just to follow up, Nikki. So eventually, if you pass the SBAC, would that be, but maybe didn't have enough credits, would that potentially be a replacement for the GED?
If you didn't pass at passing level, could you then go take the GED, and if you pass that, could that count as?
Well, I'm just wondering.
Is that your question?
No, not quite. If you didn't have enough credits, but you had passed the SBAC tests demonstrating proficiency.
Could that count as a GED?
Could that be a like an equivalent?
That's a great question.
At this point, no, it's intriguing thought, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking, it's supposed to be demonstrating proficiency.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other part that's intriguing is that we have all these folks who graduate high school, but then are not passing community college entrance exams to be placed in the right things, and yet they're doing
Exactly.
fairly well on the Common Core GED. You know, it's just another interesting alignment question. I think the thing that was so fascinating about the first presentation also is that so many people are between 1 and 4 questions away from passing, and can you imagine the economic impact and the possibility for, I mean, there's 300,000 Oregonians who don't have a high school equivalency right now.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the potential? I mean, many of them are adults, but many of them are in the 16 to 25-year-old age range as well.
Yeah, that's great, and that's a great policy question. So we're going to look into this. So.
Okay.
I have another question that can't be answered, so it'll be short because you'll have to do kind of homework here. And it's building off of the 1 to 4 question statistic. The question I've got as I'm looking at this is if you had an extra dollar to spend, would you spend it recruiting more people and increase the volume of test takers? Would you spend it trying to get those 1 to 4 questions answered among the existing test takers? Or would you try to get the honors participation up? Because I'm wondering how many folks are 1 to 4 questions away from being truly college ready. And if we were to spend some additional training resources, could we get those percentages up? Because those are very encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Those are great. So I'm going to conclude and move on if everyone is okay.
I do want to say a special thank you to the office at CCWD with Vanessa's work, because without the national attention to it, the statewide attention to it, I don't think it would have come to this level as quickly as it did in the only 9 months that she's been there.
Yeah. Thank you for your work too. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Great. So I think we're switching item 3 and item 4. So we're gonna Shandine is gonna frame it for us first with the special education research work group. Then we're gonna talk about the data. I already talked about the work plan at the beginning, so we don't have to do that. And I don't want to do a check about public testimony.
We have some.
How many do we have?
We have
3. Okay, thanks. So we need to reserve 6 minutes at the end of the meeting for that, meaning 20 minutes for all of the second piece. Maybe 24.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Since we last met, we convened a group of researchers and state workers who are committed to equity in the field of special education. We have recommendations from the board and recommendations from other researchers who know researchers who, once they heard of it, were saying, oh, have you thought about so-and-so? Have you thought about so-and-so? Not everyone was able to make it at the time. However, who did make it was Dr. Marjorie McGee from the School of Education at Portland State, Dr. Julia Sparsa-Brown in the Department of Special Education, also at Portland State, Assistant Superintendent in the Department of, in the Education and Equity Office at the Oregon Department of Education, David Bautista, Education Specialist for Talented and Gifted, Rebecca Blocker, also from ODE, 2 research analysts, one Cheng-Fei Lai from the OEIB, and Blake Whitson at ODE, and Blake Whitson, who is here today, has expertise before when he was in Illinois working for the for the state as a special education birth through 3 data and fiscal manager. So what I'm going to try to do is summarize a little bit of what we learned at that meeting and then combine it with the research from the field. We learned that we have 25 teachers in the state of Oregon who are both special education certified and bilingual, just 25. That the over-identification of English language learners in a special education disability category of speech is higher than we expected. That there is current research from one of the researchers on the team on a cultural, linguistic, and ecological framework for response to intervention with English language learners. And that even though the TAG program is significantly underfunded at the district level, that the state level is making progress towards a licensure specialization in talented and gifted. And that office also revealed a profound concern on the under-identification of students of color and girls in talented and gifted. In the next 2 minutes, I'm going to attempt to summarize both the tenor of that room of the researchers there and the field nationally and of special education in practice and dis/ability studies for Oregon. Special education is complex, multifaceted, multi-layered, an established institution that interacts with social, cultural, medical, and legal discourses, which has factors like race, ethnicity, gender, age, class, sexual orientation, and others that jump into the mix. A growing number of special education scholars in the field are currently challenging the scientific medical framework that tends to posit disability as a deficit. You know, the idea that, well, kids in special education have, higher dropout rates, lower graduation rates, longer school completion time, and so on, as though it's something that they can't achieve. These kids can't make it. Researchers are challenging the deficit paradigm, and they're signaling a move to create a space that's not special ed bad, non-special ed good, and normal and not normal. And the thing I'm about to say next is trying to summarize the room and the field of research, and it's a very hard needle to thread, so I'm going to ask you to imagine you have more than one hand. So on one hand, there's the group and researchers saying, yes, there is an overrepresentation of students of color in special education. On the other hand, special education isn't a bad thing. It's not something horrible that we wouldn't want to be identified with. And on the third hand, even though there's an over-identification, there are also a group of students and students that don't have access and may need to be identified as needing special education services because of a lack of access to, resources like, physicians. And then on the fourth hand, acknowledging that special education overall needs an overhaul. So I'm asking the board to understand that there are these concepts that seem to be juxtaposing with each other, yet try to keep those all on the head and on the table while we go and dive into the data for a second. In a recent webinar, one of the researchers, Dr. McGee, attended, it was some professional development. This, able-bodied, prominent professor who was instructing through this webinar made a statement that says we need to move students from the special education track to the AP track. The research in the field and the researchers in the room are saying, no, there's honor in special education. There's honor in the AP track too, that they're not trying to signal a move away from special education, but rather to start discussing the realm of special education, not in binaries, not in good and bad, to embrace the messiness and to look at the intersectionality of the field. That it's enmeshed with inequities in a socioeconomic and racial structure, and it's important to see it that way. And one tiny example came from the research that Dr. McGee is doing. She did a 2014 study that examined the extent to which disability studies alone and in combination with other social identities was associated with differential levels of exposure to peer victimization, bullying. So here's an example of what happens when you embrace the intersectionality of this work. Rather than examining who is at most risk for peer victimization by a single social status, this study examined who is at most risk across multiple social statuses, including disability status. Not only were youth with disabilities more likely to report exposure to peer victimization compared with youth without disabilities, but the relative magnitude of exposure to peer victimization increased when disability status was combined with sex, race and ethnicity, and sexual orientation. So our next steps, if the field is saying to examine the intersectionality, is to broaden the circle and continue that dialogue. We're going to continue with the work group, and we invite any members of the board to participate in those discussions as we dig deeper into the conversation around special education and the overrepresentation. We were going to have us work on something. I'm going to go ahead and pass that out, but essentially some themes emerged from the research and the group that the group feels need tackling. And there are 5 that have been identified, and then there's room for identifying more, because as you notice, it's just, you scrape the surface and so much is emerging just from the 1-hour meeting we were there. And those themes are to reject the commonplace deficit-based assumptions, to depathologize the stigma of special education, to reduce the barriers to receiving necessary services, to support educational models of success grounded in equity, access, and inclusion, and to embrace the overlapping and intersectional nature of the work. So I'm going to go ahead and pass these out. We may not have time for it, and even though Peter is going to dive into a slice of it, I still want you to the group, the researchers, the field still wants us to embrace the idea of all of these things interacting with each other, that it's not as simple as looking at an overrepresentation slice, although we have to start somewhere, and so that's how we're going to start the conversation. I'll pass these out when he's done, or do you want to do it right now? Just
Let's do it now, and then we'll move into see if there's questions.
So I'll just, maybe we'll invite and see if anyone has any questions, but I really just want to appreciate that work. I think that's one of the best framings I've ever heard of the competing challenges and goals associated with this work. Shandine, just one piece I might add. I don't know if this work group is the best way or if there's an additional way, but throughout our time as OEIB board members, we've heard so many really passionate parent advocates around special education come and give public testimony, both at the full meeting and also at this meeting, and it's always felt like we've never had a way to engage or hear their voice, and this group may not be the right way, but I do hope in some way there'll be a space for parents and advocates to weigh in and share their perspectives, because it's been very powerful and very clear that there's a lot of pain associated for parent advocates who've just not felt heard or respected, and I hope that we can think about how to weave that in somewhere, somehow. So I would invite, is there any questions or thoughts from folks?
So this is a definitional question, just really basic about the topic. So in my personal experience, it was described as, so special ed is either defined as having one of these specific disabilities, or that you're 2 grades behind. Is that something that's just used in the field, or is that actually the real measurement?
I can answer. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Peter
you
can.
got it.
So can Mr. DeSilva, who is the principal of the local school. So colloquially, 2 grades behind is what you'll hear often practitioners say, like, well, unless they're 2 grades behind, we're really not going to assess them. And so that is absolutely not the legal way that people or educators, professionals are to approach the identification of individuals who could possibly have a disability. But colloquially in the field, you would hear it often, so I'm not surprised. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, and there's been a change now officially in how you designate, and maybe we could provide this to the board even with a little flow chart, but I think folks have heard about response to intervention, and really a lot of our thinking today is often students need intervention. If they repeatedly don't respond to the intervention, then they may be eligible for special education, but only after you've tried a lot of other research-based practices. Then there's other folks in the field, special educators, who talk about a pattern of strengths and weaknesses. So students who have overall average or above average abilities in certain areas show a pattern in 1 or 2 areas where they have a weakness, they may be eligible for special education. But I agree with Shandine, the 2 grade levels behind is colloquial and really not in the field very meaningful. But we can provide something maybe written.
Yeah, I was just curious, so it sounds like that's not, so at the end of the day, if a student's going to be identified for special ed, they have to have one of these specific disability codes used?
I think Julia's talking a little bit about the definition according to the law, and I think that wouldn't be bad for us to look at, because these are one of the things we have to consider if we really want to change our system. So,
well, I was just saying, from my personal experience, it became so something's not happening, and at school for whatever reason, it wasn't necessarily identified disability, but 2 grades behind, let's just put a student in special ed. So I was just, I guess, interested in the definition, and as we look at it, whether that's...
We'll bring the law back, because it's an important piece of the information.
You bet.
And it's important to look at what's done in practice and what is the law, and what, to speak to a little bit of what Nicole said, what has been parents' experience versus what their experience should have been. And even examining, is that process, even though it's a legal process, a process that's culturally responsive? And so that's the whole sort of 5 different hands thing. Like, yes, we want it to be the right process. Yes, we want it to be legal, but looking at really diving into even the legal parameters of identifying a student, you have cultural and socioeconomic factors that weigh in, which in theory shouldn't, in a way that should be predictive of whether or not a student has a disability, which is what we're seeing nationally. Students in poverty pretty much predicts their outcome as being identified as having a disability, and which particular disability too, because then it becomes more likely to be ED or emotionally disturbed or learning disabled versus, a less, emotionally charged identifier and less damaging identifier. So I think what you're bringing up is extremely important, and that is absolutely something we should dive into.
I'm going to pivot to the data presentation.
Clicker. So when the committee asked a couple of meetings ago, thank you, Shandine. When the committee asked a couple of meetings ago for us to work on this particular topic about disaggregating by race, the key outcome that the committee asked for is unequivocal evidence, yes or no, about Oregon data and whether or not we show overrepresentation. And I've tried to keep the slideshow really short, but I want to point out at the outset that what you have in front of you is unequivocal evidence that we have an overrepresentation of students of color in special ed. And you might lose that because the graphs get kind of small and a little bit hard to read, but you've got it within these pages. As a matter of fact, this is pretty hot off the press material that among folks I know in the field, they've been asking me, can we share this? Because we've never seen it in Oregon before. So first off, this is the big graph. If no other graph from today makes it out of the room in your head, this is the one that you want to look at. All of them are big. We have friends of ours who've looked at this who really like slide number 7, a little bit more than this one. But what this shows, and there's really 2 ways, by the way, of looking at, didn't I have, no. Okay. There's really 2 ways of looking at over-identification. The one that I've seen over and over and over is not this one. This one, I'll show 2 in a row. Let me just make sure I know what I'm doing. Okay, there's 2 in a row. This one I think is the most powerful. The next one is important, but maybe a little bit less powerful. This tells you, by race and ethnicity, what the percentage of students is who are identified in special education. And one way to think of it is the current population of African American students or black students. If we had 100 of them, 19.4 of them would leave our room and go off to their special education experience. 19 out of 100. Whereas if we looked with white students, it would be 13 out of 100 and so on. It's also a prediction. You bring your Native American 5-year-old to kindergarten, the odds are 18% that child is going to be identified within his or her career as being in special education versus other numbers for other groups. And just to provide it, and there's different statistical techniques, but just a very simple statistical technique is standard deviation. We provided that for you just in case someone says, oh, but it's a small percentage or blah, 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 blah. This is 4 years of aggregated Oregon data. The deviation here year by year is trivial. And so these numbers are meaningful and the differences in magnitude are significant and they speak for themselves. Especially comparing against white students, Native American and African American or black students are significantly over-identified. I think it's interesting that Hispanic comes out about equal to white. At our next meeting, we will have English language learners included within this. We didn't have access to that today, but we will have that to look whether or not the language really plays a role with different groups. But I'm just going to pause for a sec, because this is a big slide. I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody. Nicole?
I just wanted to add, I think the other really important baseline assumption is that there's mountains and mountains of evidence that shows that essentially disability shows up at the exact same rate for all races. And so
Right.
sometimes
Thank you.
people look at this and they're like, oh, well, maybe there's more, the common stereotype you'll hear in the Native community is like, well, there probably is more disability because this stereotype or that stereotype or you name it, when statistically, same exact rates of disability for all races and ethnicities. And the other important one is for the communities who are under-identified. So you actually have many children who are part of different Asian communities who may legitimately need to be served and have specific needs, but because of stereotypes about the model minority or what have you, they're essentially under-identified and not receiving services they need. So it harms communities in different ways based, and so what this also, the uncomfortable truth is, this is a reflection of racial bias.
Yep.
There's no other really way to explain it when you consider the showing of disability in communities. Yes.
Is this kindergarten through 12th grade?
K-12. And I do want to identify that one thing's been asked by Nicole and others, and maybe you asked at the last meeting, is early learning, because our belief is that there may be underrepresentation in early learning that shows a different profile, and we're working on that.
I think the other thing that would be important is to disaggregate it by gender, because I guarantee you, if you look at boys versus girls for African American and Native American, those statistics will look even more upsetting.
Right, with boys being higher identified. So the second graphic is one that you'll typically see for the same question. Personally, I find it harder to follow, so I haven't used this approach for the rest of the slides, but I want to show it. This is almost a view into a special education classroom. So imagine you open the door to the special education classroom in Oregon, and what you'll see in the classroom is what's represented in blue. So you see these percentages of students within the classroom. What's in red is what you would do if you open the door into the general classroom in Oregon. So you're asking yourself, when I look at a bunch of students in a special education classroom, how is the population different than the quote-unquote regular ed? And again, you see the same differences. It's just another way of thinking of it. And again, so that means when you open that door, you'll see more African Americans in a special ed classroom than you'll see in a normal classroom, or a quote-unquote normal classroom. And we could extend this to something like advanced placements, and Shandine's raised that issue, and you would see, again, overrepresentation or underrepresentation. This is just another way to look at the same data. I don't see it as, it's confusing because for every one of these you have to look at two graphs by race ethnicity. So as we go into all the disability types, it became confusing. But if this is something that the committee, and I want to say in advance, I'm very interested either at this meeting or after, for committee members who say, hey, I want to look at this kind of data, or more of this or more of that, we can provide it. So if you like this one better, we can do this one too. Questions on this one? These are the disability codes. To Julia's question about how do you define, these are the OAR's, Oregon Administrative Rules, that define the 11 different identification types in Oregon. And we can go into more detail on these at some other point, or you may want to look them up. What came up at our two meetings ago from this group was, aren't there different types of disabilities, some which are more kind of medical and some which are more judgments of the school-based team? And that's in the slides that follow this, we're going to look at all of these different 11 types, and then we're going to look at a couple of different groupings to see if we see different things. But these are the official disability codes in Oregon.
Peter?
Yes.
And the one thing I'll add at is the Oregon codes do come directly out of IDEA Part B language. So, ours is copied word for word out of the federal reg.
Thank you very much. This is the next couple of slides, really good to look at. This one maybe is a little harder to read than the next two, but this is where you start. This is the same kind of graphic, except now what we're doing is across the bottom are those different 11 types of disability code. The height of the bar is the relative incidence in Oregon, and the colors tell you race, ethnicity. And this might be one that you want to study for 20 or 30 minutes. It's up on the web in color. I know you might have it black and white now, but it's on the web in color. But immediately some things jump out on the larger, especially look at specific learning disability. You'll see that certain colors of the bar are longer than others, and those are relative to each other. So right away, Native American, that purple thing, is way bigger than the one right above it, Pacific Islander or white or multiracial or Hispanic, and it's very close to black. And in a second, there's some numbers that go with it, but right away you see that by disability type, you get a different profile of over or under representation. Now what I saw when I saw this is, wow, deaf and blind, hearing impaired, they're so little, I can't even see what they are. So what we did next was, first off, provide you a table. So if you want to look at percentages now, you can see percentages right there. Again, this is 4 years of Oregon data, so you can compare percentages. And if you're so inclined and you want to know, are these statistically different, we could maybe talk about that. But it just gives you the raw percentages, and you see, even with some of those little, tiny little bars, significant differences, double or triple, like autism. And others you see, 2 and 3 times different. You'll notice in deaf and blind, there are very few deaf-blind students in Oregon, so the percentages are very small.
So is the takeaway from this that in areas where there's the greatest flexibility to diagnose someone, like the spectrum of autism, specific learning disability, and then kind of language development, we're seeing tons of kids of color being over-identified for that, and where you actually need a medical diagnosis, it's very similar because the assessing deafness or blindness is much less. There's much less gray area. Is that an accurate?
Good. Then that's something the committee asked about, and specifically, there's some slides that come after this, which maybe get to that even more specifically because we've grouped the medical ones. However, I do want to say that the committee did say, we're at 9:57. The committee did posit that things like deaf and blind are going to look different than specific learning disability. And that's true. However, things like visual impairment, where you think, well, that's medical, because you need a medical. Well, first off, who gets access to health care? So that plays a role in it. Secondly, visual impairment, I might be not that great, not able to see super well. Same with Dr. Golden. My parents advocate, they get into the school, they privilege, they put pressure on the team. Dr. Golden's can't, and we show up differently even though we have the same visual. So, and this comes up with Shandine's 3 or 4 hands. It's really complex. So we're going to need to keep on digging into this. The next graph, okay, see how everything's all squished down? The next thing we want to do is just kind of normalize this data by showing deaf and blind and some of these other small ones as a percentage. So these normalize the data so you can see relative to each other how are different groups doing in different areas. And then on the next one, which is, I guess, my favorite slide of the bunch, these numbers allow you to directly compare to each other across these different types and across races and ethnicities. This might be another one that deserves some considered study. But again, apropos to your question about different areas, you can look right now. Just look at one, hearing impaired. It's interesting. Hearing impaired shows Pacific Islanders way overrepresented than any other area and any other group. It's just interesting. What's beyond that? What's underneath that? What the researchers might say to that? It would be very, very interesting and beyond the bounds of today's discussion, but this is not the first time we're going to be investigating this data. Now we did some grouping. We said, well, is it medical or school? Medical or school, and then medical mixed or school, where we've looked at these different definitions and seen how the underrepresentation or overrepresentation goes. So on the first one we compared, and I'm not sure if on time we should schedule this for the next meeting to dive into this. I'm not sure, Chair, what your thoughts are.
I do want to honor ending, maybe if you could wrap it up and then we can extend this into the next meeting and then we can hear public testimony. Does that sound okay for folks?
Because I feel like this medical school thing is a great conversation. I don't want to sell it short, and these next 6 slides dive in deeply.
I would also imagine that our committee would want to have some robust time to discuss this. Yeah. So I actually feel like if we could close at this point and give ourselves space to do part 2 and then build in a great discussion, I think that would be very meaningful because this is very powerful data. So first of all, I just want to say thank you because I don't think I feel like we've been asking as a committee for, actually communities have probably been asking for a lot longer for this data, and then to see it in such a clear way is really helpful and really transparent and really appreciated. So thank you for your work and thank you for all of your leadership.
For the next meeting, when
Yes.
you have the presentation again, can you provide the definitions? Just it would be
Absolutely.
helpful to better understand what those.
Yeah.
I'll provide the regs, which do come from the federal government. That would be great. And I just want to point out that the details are really critical around definitions and some of these other things. So take-home message, underrepresentation, true. And the next meeting we'll delve deeper into
Okay.
it.
Any other additional requests for clarity on data when we do have part 2? Because
We'll spend an hour.
okay, I do have 2 more. I would love to see high school graduation disaggregated by race and IEP status. And I would love to see the racial representation of our special education teachers and aides.
Special ed teachers.
And AIDS.
And aides, the racial representation in those providing service and leadership.
I was like, AIDS?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So at this.
You got it.
Educational
Your
assistance.
paraprofessional.
Paraprofessional, yeah. Sorry if I'm using the wrong.
No, I was like, the illness.
So, just a question, and this is, we don't have any data, but I'm wondering, like, in the future, how we might look at the results of the kindergarten readiness
Yes.
assessment, and then how kids, when they actually have a school, a K-12 experience, what sort of correlation there is between that
Yes.
initial readiness assessment and
Yeah, and I think the data that's also incredibly important, and I believe that the Early Learning Council is now almost complete with looking at it, and the results are that if you actually look at where early learning dollars are spent in Oregon, they actually significantly underserve children of color. The distribution of how that population is, I mean, the children of color make up more than half of 0 to 5-year-olds, and yet they're a small fraction of those receiving early learning services. And so any early intervention or support that could be happening at that point in time is not happening because those children are effectively not engaged in those programs. And so I think that data might be more ready to bookend to part 2, because I think that is a really, it's not the only issue, but it's a very important piece of this discussion. Okay, so we're going to move on to public testimony. I need the list. Okay, great, we have 4 folks. I think that Carl is not here, so we actually only have 3. Is this Jan Anderson? Or my, great. Jim, I'm sorry, Jim. My
The handwriting.
Please join us, and
We're trying to projector off. So they're not blind.
yeah, we're going to turn the projector off if you want to join us up here, and we'd love to have 2 minutes of public testimony, please.
Yeah, I think what Ms. Jim Edwards said is the key thing, that school readiness at the time a student registers at school. This is key data because we know that a large number of children aren't ready for school yet. And in my own experience, especially in kindergarten kids, you see this trauma that the kid is in. I mean, the rebellion and the turning into stone that the child that is behind demonstrates. Later on, they learn how to cover it up better. But there is a real trauma in a child that isn't ready for school being expected to succeed. And this trauma is demonstrated in a lot of the things that we're talking about here. They're actually psychological things such as attention deficit and problems of discipline and things like that that are developed from this expectation of success when the child can't succeed. And so I feel that this is the real key thing in our data that's missing.
Thank you so much. Would like to invite Karanja Cruz to give some.
Yeah. Wow, that data was pretty powerful. It kind of made me emotionally disturbed, if you got that. But anyway, I'm here to testify about the Teaching with Purpose Conference. We were the recipients of the strategic initiatives that came out. And I wanted to pass out, if you can pass this out. But basically, I wanted to share with you the history. We started in 2001. I was a graduate student at the GTEP program in Portland State, and I came to the office of my mentor right here, Mother Joyce Harris, and she came and helped me develop this conference in 2001. And we were able to bring Bob Moses as a keynote speaker, was able to attract over 150 educators across the state. I took a 10-year sabbatical because I was in the classroom, taught for 10 years, 4 years in Beaverton and the rest in Portland Public. Recently on a PAT leave, on a study leave, getting my doctorate degree. And I started the conference back up 3 years ago, and we had a total of 10 teachers. In 2011, 2012, we had 15 teachers, and in 2013, we increased that number to 279. Wow. And this last year, we had over 300 teachers attend the conference. And I wanted to share some of the testimonials that came from the teachers who experienced the different workshops we provided within the conference. But the conference, again, is called the Teaching with Purpose Conference, and it's a call to culturally responsive instruction and teaching, which, according to this data, we really need. It's imperative. So I just want to share a couple of testimonies. I know I don't have a lot of time, but one of the testimonies where I left feeling affirmed and empowered. I also felt more compelled. I reflected on my own practice, and I was able to provide resources for my students that next following Monday. Every time I attend a Teaching with Purpose conference, I walked away inspired, moved, and in deep thought. One of the things that we do is we bring in national experts across the state who have a track record, or who basically are scholars around culturally responsive instruction and teaching. So next year, that's the lineup. I passed out the flyer for next year. I also wanted to give you guys a report from this year's conference, some of the data that we were able to collect. Also, too, I wanted to share, we're connecting policy with practice. We also have a Leadership Institute that we actually are starting tomorrow. And basically, we were looking at all the different equity policies that we have in Oregon. For example, Senate Bill 103. And we're going to delve into these policies, and we're going to connect it with practice. One of the things that we have Reynolds School District involved, we have Centennial, we have Portland Public, we have OEA, we have PAT, and we also have the Portland Parent Union, who's going to be involved in this institute, who's going to look at this, all the various equity policies and connect it to practice. And I know that's my time, but I wanted to pass this out to you. And so this, when you guys, again, go to the legislation and you talk about the strategic initiatives, tell them that their investments are in good hands and that we're actually on the ground doing the work and really trying to educate teachers on coaching responsive practice.
So thank you. I want to say this is one of our first times we've had someone who's received an investment come and give us a report out. So I really appreciate it. Yes?
Can I just add one thing? In terms of looking at this data, it would also be very instructive to have discipline data. Take a look at children who are being disciplined, who are being expelled, suspended,
Who are also
and break it down by race and gender.
And disability status.
And disability
Thank you so much.
Right.
That's a wonderful
Well,
suggestion.
and your organization's report is the best, and it's nationally recognized, so I'm happy to share that.
Joe Nunn, we'd love to have you, and I gave everybody else an extra minute, so I'm going to give you 3 minutes as well. But if you'll work really hard to keep within that 3 minutes, I know we would all be so
And I have to
appreciative.
apologize, I have, at 10:14, have to leave because I have to be on a
Yes.
leading call at 10:15.
Yes.
So I apologize in advance.
In 2000 to 2004, I ran the Association for Children with Learning Disabilities. At that point, I used to hear a lot of people talk about changing that word, disability, to difference. And it wasn't until I ran that organization when I realized that some of my teaching skills were based on my own disability. And I still remember reading things backwards in 4th grade, like many young men do, because our eyes shapes later than a girl's. I can still recall having to read things 2 and 3 times before I could decode it. And in 2nd grade, the other person of color in my classroom was a young Native American lady, and it wasn't until our 20th anniversary of our high school graduation that we both realized our 2nd grade teacher told our parents we would never graduate from college. Don't even think about it. And I know that this is a similar story that many of my classmates at Jefferson High School have expressed over the years. But one of the most telling things as the executive director of the Association with Children with Learning Disabilities was that I realized that I came from above average parents. My mom wanted to be the first woman in the big band era as a musician. She was a saxophone player. My father was a scientist who wanted to become a doctor. He ended up becoming a teacher because he was not allowed to finish at University of Oregon. By the way, he was never bitter about his experience. He loved his experience. So what I realized by doing a lot of reading is that learning disability is the wrong word. It should be learning differences. Now, when it's medically induced, then that could be a disability. But I like the word that I saw up there a lot, which was impairment. So I'm here to tell you that as a person that was never supposed to graduate from college, that I did. And because of my learning difference, I became a very good teacher because I was a multitasker. I had ADHD. My mother knew it, and that's why she had me start to become a musician myself. And once I became focused, even though I didn't read that well, I could now read something that I thought I could not ever read, and that was a musical scale. And when I learned the musical scale, I had the confidence to learn to read. So I'm really glad to be here today, but if I could ask you to consider anything, especially the data I saw as a teacher of 31 years, 3rd generation, there's a lot of things up here that I really see that you're getting data that shows what we already know that taught in the classroom. But there's anything I could ask you is consider changing that word to learning differences and not disability. And I know all the cross-disability groups that I work with are always asking that question. And the older that I get, the more I can see it should be learning differences. So I'd like you to consider that in the future.
Thank you. So I want to end by appreciating our staff. I can just say I know an incredible amount of work went into putting all of this information for us together. So thank you to that. And thank you to our community members and leaders who've shared public testimony. It's a great way to end a meeting with both great work happening in the community, a great volunteer doing amazing work at King Elementary School, and ending with your story and inspiration.
And I also taught Doppel's kids.
Oh, wow.
Who all pretty amazing kids. Yes. All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.